How's it going, guys? Today I'm going to show you how to build a fire pit with an adjustable draft for under 50 bucks. So the first thing we need is a good location. I decided to use our old sandbox, which hasn't seen much use in the past decade except for the occasional bonfire. I chose this spot because aside from the house and the deck, there isn't too much nearby that can catch fire, and I figured the sand would make you feel like you're at the beach. I cleaned it out and then determined where the center was using a measuring tape. I marked this spot so I could tell where to start digging. I then drew a 32-inch by 32-inch box around this central point. However, I would recommend making your box with sides 34 or 36 inches because 32 isn't really big enough to work with. Once you have the box marked off, it's time to start digging. Because I built my fire pit in the sandbox, I first removed all the sand and put it to the side. Once I hit dirt, I put a tarp down so I could remove it all at the end. Now for me, this was a very slow process because I live in New England and the soil here is horrible. It's completely full of rocks and roots, which is really annoying when you're trying to dig. So half my time was spent just loosening up the dirt and cutting through roots with pickaxes and other hand tools. Here you can see one of the many rocks I pulled out of the small area. I also used this flat spade to make sure that the walls were straight. So our goal here is to make the hole between 12 and 14 inches deep. At various points I tested if the hole was big enough using one of the cinder blocks that we're going to use later. At this point it wasn't, so I had to keep digging. I made the mistake of adding drainage rock before checking to see if the hole was big enough, which it wasn't, so I had to take out all the rock and keep digging. Again. You'll see in a minute why this hole is still too small. Once I was pretty sure the hole was big enough, I used the spade to dig out a little section on one of the sides in the middle. This hole should be about 8 to 12 inches long and just as deep as the rest of the hole. Later on, the pipe for the draft is going to go through the space and up to the surface. It's also very important to make sure that your hole is level on the bottom. If it is, then we can go ahead and put down a bag of drainage rock. For real this time. So except for the drainage rock, all the materials I used for this project are in this wheelbarrow. I'll include a complete list of these in the description below. So now we're actually going to assemble the fire pit, and the first thing I did was make the draft. I took a length of metal hose that's normally used for a dryer vent, which means it's heat resistant, and I bent it so that I could fit inside a hole in this concrete block. This block is 4 inches by 8 inches by 16 inches. In total, I bought 5 of these blocks that have holes through them. You want to push the vent 3 to 4 inches inside the cinder block so that it will stay even when it's underground. The metal vent should fit tightly inside the cinder block. It's also important to make sure that there's nothing blocking airflow. Now position the block so that the vent is coming up through the hole in the side that we dug earlier. As this block, along with 3 others, forms the foundation of the fire pit, it's important to make sure that it's level. If it's not, move the dirt and rocks around underneath so it's level both lengthways and widthways. Now we're going to add the other foundation blocks. These are all cap blocks, which means they don't have holes in them like the first one we used. It is very important to make sure that these blocks are completely level. You can see here how I'm going to arrange the blocks in the fire pit. In order to get the blocks as far back as possible, I used a sledgehammer and a wooden post to push them. However, in some areas the hole still wasn't big enough, so I had to keep digging. When you arrange these blocks, they should be corner to corner with only a slight amount of overlap. It's a little hard to explain, but when you overlap the blocks, the center area should still be a square. Not only did the blocks have to be level, but the inside corners should be as close to 90 degrees as possible. It's very important that you get these 2 things right, because if you don't, the fire pit will look slightly off from the top. Once I was happy with the orientation of these 4 foundation blocks, I put in 1 square paver in the center. Then I built the walls using concrete blocks with holes in them. The reason I use these and not the ones that are solid is because these are slightly cheaper. If your 4 foundation blocks are lined up the right way, the walls should go into place very easily. Here you can see what the overall structure of the fire pit looked like before I filled in the dirt. Then I carefully added dirt around the concrete blocks to fill in the hole. I didn't fill it all the way up though, because I'm just going to put sand on top. Now before you put in the dirt around the draft, it's important to make sure that you block off the holes. I was going to use this concrete patch, but I realized I didn't have enough time, so I just used some rocks and gravel instead. Using rocks isn't the best solution, but it's better than nothing. I also put this curved rock I found on top of the vent to help prevent it from getting crushed. Then I filled in the rest of the dirt. The vent I bought was actually too long, so I unwound it and then cut the piece off. It should be just long enough so that it's flush with the ground. I also bought this little drainage cap, which actually fits perfectly on top of the tube. I kept adding soil until I only had a couple more inches to fill. At this point, I scooped in the excess sand that I had removed at the beginning. I packed it down so that it was flush with the edge of the fire pit. To finish it off, I put some decorative pavers on top so you wouldn't have to see the concrete blocks. As you can see here, I put 3 small ones and 1 big one on each side, and it was a pretty good fit. And then you're done. When I was finished, I removed the dirt and raked out the sand that was left. I also decided to add a new bag of sand, just to freshen it up a little bit. This project took me 2 days, but if you were to do it in an area with less roots, I'd say you could get it done in 1 afternoon. Once I was happy with how it looked, it was time for the inaugural fire. First, I crumpled up a bunch of newspaper and other types of paper, and threw them in the bottom of the hole. Next came the strips of cardboard. On top of that, I added sticks and twigs in the shape of a teepee. And finally, I placed small pieces of wood, also in the shape of a teepee. I added bigger logs once the fire got going. Then, to start it, I lit the paper at the bottom. I lit both sides, and after a couple seconds, the flames started to spread. It didn't take long at all for the fire to completely ignite. The flames that came out of the fire pit were surprisingly tall, and the fire threw a lot of heat and seemed to burn very efficiently. As for the draft, you can adjust the amount of air going into the fire by using another paver. At this point, the fire is burning so well it's hard to see a difference between when the draft is covered versus when it's not. But you can definitely feel air getting sucked into the draft if you put your hand on it. Just a quick note about why I put the draft where I did. As the fire burns and air inside the fire pit rises, cool air from the surface gets sucked down. So by adding a pipe straight from the surface to the bottom, we create an easy channel for fresh, clean, cool air to get to the bottom of the fire, thus keeping the fire oxygenated. My design is based on what's called a Dakota fire hole, which are supposed to burn very efficiently with very little smoke. And so far, I would say that my fire pit meets both of those goals. If you wanted to, you could build a fire pit without the draft. It would save you about $15, bringing the total cost to $35 or $40. However, in my opinion, the draft is worth it. This has been a Munchkin Robot how-to video. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, ideas about how I could improve the design, or suggestions for future videos, please let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with anyone who you think would find this interesting.